Hi, everybody. My name is Roy Yanong, and I'm a professor and extension veterinarian based at the University of Florida IFAS Tropical Aquaculture Laboratory. In this lecture, we're going to cover fish health management. I'm going to provide you an overview of fish health management that hopefully will help you with your systems and just managing your fish in general. So my first question, if I asked you what is the primary goal of good fish health management, which of these would you say would be the correct answer? A, to treat sick fish properly using the right drugs and dose. B, to keep fish healthy with good husbandry and by minimizing stressors. Or C, to eliminate all potential pathogens, which are disease-causing agents. Hopefully, you all thought B was correct. Ultimately, that's really what we're trying to do, is to keep fish healthy. So we want to avoid having sick fish to begin with, and that's really kind of the whole point. So health and disease are two ends of the same line. We can have really, really, really healthy fish, optimal health on one side. If we're trying to some of the producers, our farmers are trying to breed fish. The breeders have to be really, really good, healthy and in good condition in order to actually produce the gametes they need to spawn. We can have fish that are maybe not quite as healthy, but they still look okay. Maybe they're a little bit, they could use a little bit more food, etc. And then we can kind of start shifting over to the right a little bit more, where maybe we have a fish that has some disease. We're just not really seeing it. It's not as obvious. Then we may have fish that look like they are sick with clinical disease. And then we are going to have fish that look sick and are really not going to be able to be saved. They're at the point of no return and eventually will die. So it really is kind of a spectrum of what we can see and observe and what's actually going on with a fish. So this slide goes over some kind of old school ideas on disease. The first term, epidemiology, some of you may be familiar with. That's the study of diseases in populations. So things that cause disease, what some of the risks are, how disease spreads. A pathogen, normally we consider a pathogen to be an infectious organism that causes disease. Usually we're talking about bacteria, parasites, viruses, or fungi or water molds, at least with fish. And then the environment we have to consider as well. Even though we normally a lot of people think of disease as being caused by something that is infectious, we can also have non-infectious causes of disease. For example, problems with water quality. I list a few kind of water quality problems there, as well as things like toxins. And so the old school way I was thinking about it was we have a fish, we have a disease organism, something infectious or, some sort of pathogen, and then something going on wrong in the environment. So when these things kind of come together just the right way, there's going to be disease. So this is kind of a more modern approach to disease. I call it kind of a two-ring circus. And really the focus is on keeping the fish as healthy, happy, if you want to say, as possible, and maintaining a really, really good environment. And those two things are the best things you can do. There are a lot of things that are going to be factors for whether a fish is going to be more or less likely to become sick. So things obviously like its immune status, just like with people who have, good or bad immunity, genetics, age, sometimes even sex may play a role, and then whether or not they have disease organisms on them that may or may not cause problems depending on what's going on in the other circle in the environment. So in the environment, we can have problems or good things with the water quality. We can have potentially treatments people are using in the water that may or may not be good for the fish. If there are plants, maybe they're helping, maybe they're not. We can also have potentially other types of disease-causing organisms as well that are in the environment, but not in the fish yet. So you really want to kind of maintain optimal conditions in the environment and try to make sure your fish are as healthy as possible. So before we go on a little bit more and talk about disease, I want to talk a little bit about stress and the stress response or the stress reaction in fish. First, another little quiz. Can you choose the best answer here? So does stress affect mucus? Does stress disrupt osmoregulation, which is salt and water balance in the fish? Can temperature affect the immune system in fish? And can some antibiotics actually depress the immune system? Or is it all of the above? Well, the correct answer is all of the above. All of these things can happen. So it really is important for us to understand better what stress means and what stress can do to fish. So what is stress? It is a complicated concept. Normally we'll talk about a stressor, which is something that causes a response in the fish. So some sort of event, usually it's going to be somewhat negative, but again, just like we know we can have positive stressors in our own lives. For example, if you're running, that's a bit of a stress, but it's actually helping your body to become maybe more fit. There are also stressors that are going to be negative as well. If you're outdoors, it's really, 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 really hot outside and you're not prepared, then obviously the heat's going to be a really negative stressor. So there are stressors. Some are okay and some are going to be worse than others. And then there's going to be the reaction of the fish, or the stress, essentially, which is how the fish will handle that stressor. In kind of general case, in general terms, the stress or the reaction of the fish is supposed to help the fish to deal with that stressor. So the problem occurs when the fish is placed in a situation that is going to be beyond its normal tolerance. So a lot of that is going to depend on how the fish is at the beginning of this. So is the fish healthy to start with? And another component of whether that's going to be a bad or good event is how big and how long the stressor is. There are lots of different types of stressors. We can categorize them a lot of different ways, but this is one way. We can have chemical stressors. So we can consider water quality that's not good to be a chemical stressor, and even poor diet. Essentially, food is chemicals that you're putting into the fish's body, or the fish is putting into its own body. We can have biological stressors, which include crowding, aggression, territoriality. Maybe the requirements for swimming aren't being met in a specific type of system, and potentially disease organisms or pathogens. We can have physical stressors. So maybe the temperature's not quite what the fish wants. It's a little bit too warm or a little too cold. Maybe the lighting's not good. It's too bright, or there's too much light, or maybe there's a lot of loud sounds in the room or in the system that are going to be disturbing the fish. We can also have procedural stressors. For example, the fish being handled maybe not as well as they could be. Sometimes, obviously, when fish are being shipped from one place to another, for example, from a farm to a pet store, there's going to be stressors involved with that. And then even some treatments that we use, even if there are the correct treatments, can cause stress as well. So what happens and what are the stages of stress or the 5 stages of adaptive response to these stressors, or to the stress that the fish is feeling? So the first stage we talk about is the alarm reaction. And that is something you may have heard of. It's called the fight or flight. People have it too. A good example, for example, is if you walk in front of a bus that's coming at you, you're going to have this initial kind of surge of adrenaline. So all these things are going to happen in you, but also things similar are going to happen in fish if they're under a stressor. Increase in blood sugar. There's going to be disruption of their osmoregulation because hormone changes. They're going to increase their breathing, and they're also going to have an immunosuppressive reaction because of some of the hormones and steroids that are going through their body. The second stage is resistance. So the fish is trying to adapt, but it's using a lot of energy, and it's trying to fight a battle to kind of get back to its normal state. The third stage is exhaustion. The fish can no longer adapt to the stress of that it's under. It's going to use up its energy, and the stress is too severe and too long for the fish. In the fourth stage, this is when disease is going to occur. The fish is no longer able to maintain this normal physiologic state. It's gone beyond its ability to handle it, and it's going to have an abnormal condition or even be more susceptible to an infection. If things are going even more poorly, then the fish is going to die. So what are some of the effects of stress on outer defenses of fish? So many of you know, of course, you've held fish, you know, they have a lot of mucus around them. So stress can actually cause changes in this mucus and also disrupt their salt and water balance, which is really, really important for them to function normally. Also, if you're not handling them correctly, you're going to be physically removing mucus, which will also disturb them. And likewise, chemicals and some treatments can remove mucus even if they're being used properly. Scales and skin, for fish that have scales, these scales can be removed and actually tear skin off as well, by poor handling, trauma from maybe fighting from, between fish, or from other agents like parasites or bacteria. Stress also, as we mentioned, will affect the immune system. So we have a response in fish called inflammation, really non-specific response. Stress can cause an increase in blood hormones like cortisol that will decrease the general immune response. Likewise, we can have things like temperature decreases that can cause a depression of the immune system and production of antibodies in fish. All right, we talked a little bit about stress. Let's talk about disease. Disease is a pain, pun intended. One important thing I like to make sure everyone is aware of is that often, especially with fishing and aquaculture, disease is going to be multifactorial. There's going to be a lot of different reasons or factors when a fish will get disease. Often water quality will combine with maybe light parasite or bacterial loads and other management potential issues. And all of these things will come together and make disease or cause disease. Predisposing factors that will be problematic will depress the immune system and or potentially increase the number of pathogens, parasites, bacteria, viruses, fungi, water molds in the system. So any of the things that we're going to talk about a little bit later that will predispose problems with the fish's health and immune system or increase the number of pathogens are going to also precipitate disease. So there are a lot of different types of diseases and some major kind of groupings and categories I want to point out. First of all, many people don't consider them disease, but technically we do have non-infectious diseases. Some of you are, I'm sure, familiar with genetic diseases. Fish can have genetic diseases. Some of these are going to be obvious and may or may not be related to, for example, deformities, but they can also have other genetic diseases that will manifest other problems. In addition, if there are problems with genetics, kind of overall, there can be a general disease susceptibility as well. We also like to consider environmental related non-infectious diseases. We talked about water quality already. You can have really, really low oxygen or no oxygen. That's going to cause a major problem, die off. Yeah, I would consider that a disease related issue. You can have trauma related to predation, one fish eating another, or aggression. We can have toxins that are going to cause disease or problems with nutrition. Nutritional diseases are not uncommon. We can have problems with over or underfeeding, the wrong food choice, some generalized imbalance with the macro and micronutrients. And sometimes this is going to manifest as maybe fish not just doing well in general. It may not be really, really specific, but we do have some more specific disease signs related to more specific kind of imbalances. For example, if there's problems with vitamin C, phosphorus, or calcium, we can see skeletal or cartilage deformities. Vitamin E problems can lead to muscle disease or anemia, as can fatty acid problems. With thiamine, B6, vitamin A, and riboflavin, we can have nervous system or eye-type diseases. So there are going to be maybe some more specific signs, but again, there are a lot of things that can be related to problems with nutrition. There's also commercial or kind of pellets or flakes versus kind of live foods potential issues. So live foods, for example, may harbor pathogens that can be incorporated or go into a system and be ingested by fish. So another kind of consideration. The picture I have there on the right, it may be kind of hard to tell, but the fish on the bottom has a little bit of a deformity. You can see the face is a little bit smushed, the tail and the back part of the body, the caudal peduncle, are a little bit bent and a kind of different shape versus the fish on top. And this was caused by a poor diet in these fish, causing skeletal deformities. Of course, we can also have infectious diseases, which are caused, as we discussed, by parasites, bacteria, fungi, or water molds and viruses. The pictures here I have are of a clown loach, which is a real common aquarium fish with white spots and a lot of kind of white mucus all over it. And the lower picture is the cause of that. It's actually white spot disease caused by Ichthyopteris multifilius. It's a one-celled parasite that's really, really important in freshwater. All right, so disease prevention then, as we talked about at the beginning, we really want to have healthy fish, good environments. We want to avoid disease. We don't really want to be behind the 8 ball and having to treat because that's usually going to be, in many cases, a losing proposition. One of the big keys for disease prevention is good biosecurity. So what is biosecurity? Biosecurity is an approach and the practices associated with that approach that will minimize the risk of introducing infectious disease or disease organisms, pathogens into a system or facility. It's also going to be minimizing the risk of transferring diseases between tanks or systems on a facility, and minimize moving diseased animals or pathogens to other facilities. It's also important to note that good biosecurity practices are going to also include practices that will maximize a healthy environment and good nutrition and minimize stressors. It's a little biosecurity warrior there trying to keep the bad pathogens or organisms out. But again, part of that also includes having really, really good water quality, nutrition, environment, so that the fish's immune system is up to the task as well. So this is a maybe one way to remember 5 critical control points or ways disease-causing organisms can get into a system and kind of move around within a facility. So things to consider are, number 1, animals, in this case, fish. Fish coming in can potentially bring diseases with them, of course. The water, if you're bringing water over, maybe from where fish are coming from, water can have disease organisms in it as well as what your source water is. You know, is your source water clean? Feed and food, we talked about that already. Usually commercial, pellets and flake food, that sort of things, those things should be fairly clean, unless of course they're not stored properly. Then you can have things growing on them that can potentially cause problems with the fish. Live foods, of course, because they're alive, can potentially bring disease organisms into the system and into your fish as well. There's a term called vectors, and these are live things that can potentially bring disease organisms onto your facility. In some cases, for example, there may be parasites that have life cycles, including birds or other, snails that will, if they get into your system, transfer those life cycles into the system and cause disease in fish. Likewise, they can also bring bacteria. People potentially can bring bacteria on their hands if they're maybe working on one tank that's sick and going to another tank without washing their hands. And then the last term, or the last kind of control point, we call fomites. And these are dead things that can potentially bring organisms over as well. So things in the environment, equipment, nets, for example, that were maybe used in a tank that had sick fish before, if it's not disinfected, and then it's going to be used into a tank that has healthy fish, you may bring things over. Likewise, when we talk about bigger types of systems, systems maybe in the ocean, for example, we think about things like boats, but also, vehicles, etc. So these are 5 different ways that disease organisms can get into your system. So you really want to kind of think about each of these and how it relates to your system, and whether or not things can come in through these different routes into your building or facility. So what are the 3 M's of biosecurity? These are things I want you to think about as kind of big picture ways to improve and approach how you handle biosecurity at your place. So the first M is management of animals, and the next 2 are management of pathogens and management of people. So animal management, obviously you want to get healthy fish. You want to test for diseases if there's any problems, work with a fish health professional, a veterinarian, if you do. And of course, you want to optimize your husbandry and water quality to make things as good as possible for your animals. Pathogen management. So we talked about the kind of 5 different ways pathogens can potentially get in or move around. So you want to try to avoid the really, really bad pathogens, keep them out. Some of the pathogens are just going to be opportunistic and are just going to be around, and really will only be a problem if your fish's immune systems are down. So you want to try to control those levels of pathogens. And then you, of course, want to stop spread, as we talked about. Really, really important, by washing hands, disinfecting equipment, etc. And then, of course, people management. This is one I think that is probably the least maybe considered in biosecurity. You want to make sure everybody is educated, and anyone that's going to be working with the fish or the systems, and everyone is communicating. If someone sees problems, or if there's anything that someone doesn't understand, they need to understand it. There have to be good written protocols for how things are managed. Everyone needs to kind of buy in, especially when we talk about biosecurity. Again, you have to have good cleaning and disinfection protocols for different systems, tanks, etc. Make sure you're doing things properly. So 3 important things: animal management, pathogen management, and people management. So you want to prevent disease. As we talked about, that's really kind of the ultimate goal. So you want to make sure you develop a good fish health management plan, work with aquaculture and fish health professionals to maybe start thinking about that plan. Remember the 3 M's, maximize you want to do all those things to maximize the immune system of the fish, minimize pathogens, and manage personnel. So again, really, really important to remember the importance of these 3. The 3 M's will also help to minimize stress and its effects. Biology, of course, you want to know your species. You want to know the right environment, tank dimensions, substrate, lighting, etc. You want to know social structure and behavior. You want to understand specific physiologic and biological needs and adaptations. Water quality. You ideally want to understand your water as best as you can. It's going to vary from place to place. Some places maybe are using well water. Some are you going to use city or municipal water, which may have chlorine or chloramines in it. Is the water being processed before it's being used? Presumably, for example, if you do have city water, you're getting rid of the chlorines or chloramines, other things that may be in it. Likewise, if you have well water, there may be problems that need to be addressed with well water as well. Do you know the system components? Do you understand the different filters and what they're doing in your system? And is your water quality optimal, or at least adequate for the fish? Is the source water good? Is it being managed properly? Are things being done as they are supposed to be? All these things are really important. Nutrition we talked about already, really important for health and general immunity. There are going to be some challenges with whether you have wild caught fish or farm raised. I think most of you I assume, are going to be dealing with farm raised fish, but just in case, you want to kind of keep those things in mind. You want to know your species needs. What do they need in terms of nutrition? Is it digestible and suitable? What other considerations are there? For example, age. There's going to be maybe different diets for young fish versus older fish. When are they going to be fed? Ideally, that's kind of laid out, and you're doing it to optimize the feeding so that it's not being wasted, but also that they're getting just the right amount. And how often, likewise. When is the fish going to be needing the most food? Usually when they're a lot younger, so they're going to be needing food more often. All those things need to be kind of considered. There's a lot of commercial diets out there. I think most of you will be probably using commercial diets. So hopefully the macronutrients, micronutrients, et cetera, are all good. Freshness and storage is really, really important. You want to make sure that it's being used before its expiration date and that it's being stored properly. Typically with a lot of pelleted feeds, et cetera, it's going to be suggested that they be kept in cool, dry places. Other things, for example, if they get too moist and too warm, you may get fungal toxins, or the fat may become rancid, or other vitamins, et cetera, will break down. So it's really important that they are stored properly. We talked about live and frozen foods. They can be a good source, but again, they can potentially transmit disease as well. So you want to keep that in mind. All right, so you have a sick fish. What do? Don't start throwing things in the water. Don't start making major changes. Ideally, you want to get in touch with somebody, or at least have a protocol that you've developed with a aquaculture and a fish health professional or veterinarian, ideally, so you know what to do at the beginning. And ideally, at some point, you want to get a diagnosis and don't guess. Proper diagnosis is critical to successfully resolve and also hopefully prevent any problems. You want to look at all potential factors that may be part of the problem. You really do want to know what your limits are diagnostically. That's kind of what we're here for, to help you out. So you want to work with the aquaculture extension folks, other professionals, as well as fish health professionals, and really kind of make sure you're doing things properly. Remember, some treatments are actually going to do more damage than good if they're not used properly. Some of the important information, hopefully you're going to be kind of collecting, or we'll have some record keeping we'll talk about, is really, really important. But information on the system, water parameters, whether things have changed, what type of nutrition, have new fish been added, any types of handling issues or personnel or procedural changes, and have any treatments been used. Disease course, when did it start? How many deaths or sick fish per day? Is it spreading in the systems, or spreading to different buildings or ponds if you have more than one system? And then what kind of disease signs are you seeing? Are they behaving, or do they look different? Are there lesions on them? All those things are important. And is the disease kind of progressing a certain way? Do you see the fish looking and acting one way, and then later on they look and act another way? That kind of helps as well. So often the best way, at least in aquaculture, is to look at samples. So again, you really want to have a plan ahead of time before you have problems with a vet or fish health professional and an aquaculture person, to develop procedures on how to approach disease issues, and also what information is needed. Normally, a water sample is going to be critical. Hopefully you are testing your water. We want to get a really good representative water sample at the time of the outbreak as well, and know if there's any treatments or things that have been added. Also want to have a good sample of fish. Again, in many instances, you may have to sacrifice fish that are sick to see what's going on, to really, really know and how best to treat. If you use drugs or chemicals without a good diagnosis, you may hide the original problem. And as mentioned already, some drugs or chemicals will really make the problem worse if they're not being used properly. All right, so some practical approaches. What does all that mean? Well, obviously you want to start with healthy fish, have a good source of fish. Do regular water testing. That means you understand your source and your system water and what's going on with it, have good system management. You want to optimize your nutrition, make sure it's suitable for the species, it's being managed properly, it's fresh, stored properly. And you also want to, again, with regard to nutrition, be aware of potential reservoirs of disease. Is it poorly stored? Or is there a better way to store it? Are you feeding live or frozen foods? Could those have contributed to the disease problem? And then, of course, you want to have good biosecurity. The 3 M's are important, as well as those 5 critical control points that we discussed. One of the biggest things that you can do, even if it's simple, is have some sort of record keeping. It's really, really going to be helpful in the long run, especially if you start having problems and you want to try to trace where things maybe went wrong. So this is something, again, that maybe you can work with the aquaculture extension folks or the fish health people to try to have a better handle on what type of records are going to be useful for you. If you have any questions, obviously let us know. Hopefully that kind of gives you an overview of things to consider. Really no time to go in really, really great detail, but at least hopefully it gives you some things to start thinking about as you venture forth in aquaculture.